Hello U.S. History students, and welcome to Unit 6, Lesson 5, Fighting World War II in the Pacific. While the war is coming to an end in Europe, that doesn't mean that World War II is ending entirely. The Allies still have to fight the Japanese in the Pacific. And this doesn't mean that we've not fought them at all throughout the rest of the war. In 1941, when the United States enters the war, FDR and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill meet in the White House and discuss a plan of action. And at that point, they decide that Hitler's the biggest threat. So they're going to go after him first and then focus on Europe. But at that point, we're still fighting the Japanese. At that point, the United States is fighting a two-front war, which means we have part of our troops in Europe fighting Hitler, and the other part is in the Pacific fighting the Japanese. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the U.S. sends troops to the Pacific Theater, and just like those in Europe are being led by Dwight Eisenhower, the troops in the Pacific are led by Douglas MacArthur. World War II also leads us to a lot of new technology. In the Pacific, we start using aircraft carriers for the first time. Ships that can carry airplanes, and then we can launch those airplanes from the ocean and attack our enemies. It's very new, and it actually helps us quite a bit. The turning point in the war in the Pacific comes at the Battle of Midway. Remember, a turning point is when the side that was losing starts winning. And the reason that Midway is a turning point is because after that battle, the Allies begin to regain islands that had previously been controlled by Japan. Because part of the things that the strategy of the Japanese, yes, they need mainland land so that they can get resources, but they also start to take over many islands in the Pacific, some of those that were previously controlled by the United States. After the Battle of Midway, the U.S. begins to regain control of some of those islands. The Japanese, however, do not play by traditional rules of war. They use different tactics because they have different beliefs. One tactic that they use is kamikaze pilots. These pilots fly their planes into the enemy battleships and aircraft carriers because to the Japanese, it's dishonorable to surrender. And the way that they fight is they want to take out as many of their enemy as possible, even if that means losing their own lives. So a kamikaze pilot will fly their plane using it essentially as a bomb into an enemy battleship or aircraft carrier to blow up that ship and kill as many of their enemy as possible. The Japanese soldiers, for the same reason, refuse to surrender. They believe it's dishonorable to their family and to their emperor. And they also start torturing Allied prisoners of war. The problem for the Allies was to take time and troops it would cost to retake the thousands of islands the Japanese control in the Pacific. We don't have the time, nor do we have the manpower. And so we got to come up with a strategy, the best way that we can think of to use the least amount of troops in the quickest amount of time. And the U.S. developed a strategy called island hopping, led by Chester Nimitz. This strategy basically forces are only concentrated on strategically important islands. Islands that are going to be helpful in our end goal, which is to defeat the Japanese. The fight for Guadalcanal takes 6 months, and this is one of our first major battles in the Pacific. We fight it for 6 months at a cost of 25,000 Japanese and 2,000 Americans. And then from 1943 to 1945, the Allies end up taking back the Philippines, which was previously an American protectorate. And it takes us a long time because there are several islands in that chain. But eventually we do take back the Philippines, and then we start moving in on Japan using that island hopping strategy. In 1945, the Allies win 2 very strategic islands, Iwo Jima and Okinawa. These two islands are very strategic because they're close to the Japanese mainland. We need Iwo Jima, which is Japanese for Sulphur Island. It's basically an uninhabited volcanic island that we could very easily use as an air base. We can let our ships take off from the aircraft carriers, land on Iwo Jima, refuel, take off from Iwo Jima, and easily hit the mainland. We're going to look here in a minute at a video that's going to give you some more information on the Battle of Iwo Jima. From these islands, though, we begin firebombing many Japanese cities, and this helps us to really make our presence known, for one, but also start leading us into the end of war. So let's take a look at that video.
This is Staff Sergeant Alvin Josephi Jr., a United States Marine Corps combat correspondent speaking from Iwo Jima. An attack is underway, and so far this morning, in a couple of hours, they have gone approximately 500 yards through the most difficult kind of terrain. This island is studded with pillboxes, and they have already passed through several lanes of them and have passed over the volcanic ash, the terrible yellow, craggy, rocky, lifeless soil of this part of the island. Whoops, some bullets are whistling past us. We are in the open. Japanese mortars and also small arm fire are occasionally dropping around us. This is very near the front, and there is quite a bit of fire going on around here. The roar you hear in the background, our planes are coming from our own planes that are assisting the infantry just up ahead of us. It is a tremendously well-fortified island. I compare it to the Siegfried Line or one of those fortified lines in Europe, except that this is the entire island studded with such a line. Well, this is a moment at Iwo Jima. It is what the men are living under in their foxholes here. When you go to bed in your foxhole at night, you lie awake usually for hours listening to this. Now, this is Staff Sergeant Alvin Josephi Jr. concluding this broadcast from Iwo Jima.
Despite losing control of the Pacific, withstanding the firebomb attacks, and everything else we're throwing at them, Japan refuses to surrender. By May of 1945, the war in Europe's over. Hitler has committed suicide. The Germans have surrendered. And the U.S. begins preparing for a land invasion of Japan. Kind of similar to what we did with D-Day. But maybe a land invasion's not really necessary. In 1939, Albert Einstein writes the president, FDR, about a potential nuclear weapon. FDR created a top secret program called the Manhattan Project. And this is so top secret that only a few people in the government actually know about it. So here's the letter that Einstein writes. Sir, some recent work by E. Fermi and L. Slizard, which has been communicated to me in manuscript, leads me to expect that the element uranium may be turned into a new and important source of energy in the immediate future. Certain aspects of the situation which has arisen seem to call for watchfulness and, if necessary, quick action on the part of the administration. I believe, therefore, that it is my duty to bring your attention to the following facts and recommendations. In the course of the last 4 months, it has been made probable, through the work of Joliet in France as well as Fermi and Slizard in America, that it may become possible to set a nuclear chain reaction in a large mass of uranium, by which vast amounts of power and large quantities of new radium-like elements would be generated. Now it appears almost certain that this could be achieved in the immediate future. This new phenomenon would lead to the construction of bombs, and it is conceivable, through much less certain, that extremely powerful bombs for a new type may thus be constructed. A single bomb of this type, carried by boat and exploded in port, might very well destroy the whole port together with some of the surrounding territory. However, such bombs might very well prove to be too heavy for transportation by air. Essentially, one of the greatest physicists in history is telling FDR, hey, I got this new weapon. Let me tell you about it. Robert Oppenheimer was put in charge of developing the bomb. And from 1942 to 1945, a number of secret labs across the nation develop and build that bomb. We have 4 specific sections of the nation that are working independently on different components to build the bomb. We have Los Alamos and Trinity in New Mexico, which is where we're going to test the bomb and kind of figure out the final bits. The bomb was constructed in a secret city in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which was basically created specifically for the construction and creation of this bomb. And it was so top secret that the people that worked there didn't even know what they were actually working on. Physicist Enrico Fermi at the University of Chicago develops the nuclear reaction, and the nuclear plant in Hanford, Washington develops the plutonium. All of these components together create the first ever nuclear bomb ever tested, which is tested in the deserts of New Mexico in 1945. In April of 1945, however, FDR dies. He has a cerebral hemorrhage, and because of chain of command, his vice president, Harry Truman, takes over. It's not until Truman becomes president that he finds out that FDR was planning the Manhattan Project. He's not even let in on the secret as vice president. But now, knowing this technology, he's got to decide how to end the war. Do we use it? Do we not? Do we use a land invasion of Japan? How are we going to end this now that the war is over in Europe? In July of 1945, the Big Three, as they're so nicknamed, Winston Churchill of Great Britain, Harry Truman of the United States, and Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union, meet at what we call the Potsdam Conference to discuss the end of World War II and what's going to happen after the war is over. Truman had learned of the atomic bomb, he knew it was ready, and issued the Potsdam Declaration to Japan. Surrender or face destruction. So this is their ultimatum. Either surrender now, we can end it this way, or face destruction. When Japan refuses to surrender, Truman orders the bombing of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. This is the first atomic bomb ever used in combat. But Japan still doesn't surrender. After 3 days, a second atomic bomb is dropped on the city of Nagasaki. After that second atomic bomb and seeing the death and the destruction and how horrible everything is, Emperor Hirohito finally decides, okay, I've been beat. And he surrenders.
The new world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
What we just watched was Robert Oppenheimer, the developer of the atomic bomb, and his reaction to the destruction that his creation caused. I am become death, destroyer of worlds. This is his reaction. He is awestruck, and not in a good way. And this is a lot of people's reaction. But the surrender of Emperor Hirohito brings a final end to the World War II. It's over. We won. So some conclusions and the impact of this war on the rest of the world. World War II is the largest, most deadly, and most impactful war in world history. Europe is destroyed by the war, even more so than World War I, and it loses its place as the epicenter of power in the world. Prior to this, France was the diplomatic capital of the world. That's where most of our treaties are signed, most of our negotiations occur. But France has just been occupied by the Germans for many years, and their country is devastated by it. Not only that, but the United States and the Soviet Union emerge as the superpowers. And while we were allies during the war, we really become enemies after. We're rivals competing for influence in the world. One country democratic, one country communist. We have different political ideals, different economic ideals, and different thoughts on how countries should be run entirely. A United Nations was formed to replace the League of Nations as a better version to help promote peace within the world. We've now been through 2 world wars, and no country wants to see that happen again. And then many colonized nations begin to demand independence from Europeans. At that point, they demand self-governance, and they feel as though they deserve it. This brings us to the end of Unit 6, Lesson 5, and I hope you have a great day.